You're cutting my salary to $42,000. That's what I said. Loud enough for everyone in that Austin conference room to hear. Garrett Sullivan didn't even blink, just sat there like some corporate king, watching me process the number that had just blown up my life. My name's Nathan Pierce. I'm 47 years old, married to Sarah, got 2 kids, and until that moment, I was making $110,000 a year as senior materials engineer at Titanium Dynamics Corporation. 7 years I'd been there. 7 years of 60-hour weeks, breakthrough innovations, and making that company serious money. $110,000 down to $42,000. That wasn't a pay cut. That was execution by spreadsheet. It's company-wide restructuring, Nathan, Garrett said in that smooth voice of his. Nothing personal. Nothing personal. Right. That's why I was the only senior engineer getting financially waterboarded while his 24-year-old niece Ashley just got promoted to department supervisor with 0 qualifications. That's why my 401k contributions got frozen last month. That's why my health insurance premiums just doubled. The paper sat in front of me like a death warrant. Organizational restructuring, it said at the top, with my name typed neatly below in Times New Roman. I didn't grab it, just stared at it while some suit from corporate finance, never bothered learning his name, started talking about market pressures and realigning resources with revenue streams. Translation, we're bleeding money and someone has to pay for it. That someone was me. The thing is, I'd seen this coming for months. Budget meetings I wasn't invited to anymore, projects getting reassigned without explanation, equipment orders that never got approved, my research assistants being temporarily moved to other departments. But the real giveaway was 3 weeks ago when I caught Garrett and his VP Bradley Walsh huddled over printouts of my lab notes in the break room. They scattered like roaches when they saw me. They were planning to push me out and keep my work. That was their first mistake. Here's what Garrett didn't know. For the past 3 years, I'd been working nights and weekends in my garage, developing something that would change everything. Not using company time, not using company resources, my own equipment, my own materials, my own sweat and 401k money that I'd borrowed against. I'd solved a problem that had stumped aerospace engineers for decades: how to create titanium polymer composite coatings that could cure at sub-zero temperatures without losing structural integrity. Every major manufacturer, Boeing, Lockheed Martin, Northrop Grumman, had been trying to crack this for years. The market was worth $180 million annually in aerospace applications alone, with automotive and defense adding another $120 million. I'd done it. Patent applications filed 6 months ago. US 10,000 to 34,567 for the primary coating system, US 10,234,568 for the curing catalyst, US 10,234,569 for the application process. All mine, all documented, all bulletproof. My garage lab wasn't much to look at from the outside, but inside I had $75,000 worth of equipment I'd bought piece by piece over 3 years. A Shimadzu DSC 60 differential scanning calorimeter I got at an equipment auction for $8,000. An Instron 5565 universal testing machine that cost me $15,000 used. Temperature-controlled curing chambers I built myself using industrial heating elements and PID controllers. Every night after Sarah and the kids went to bed, I'd work until 2 a.m. Every weekend I'd spend 8 to 10 hours in that garage. Sarah thought I was just tinkering with electronics. She had no idea I was developing technology that would revolutionize an entire industry. The breakthrough happened on a Tuesday night in February. I'd been trying to solve the polymer cross-linking problem at low temperatures. Most aerospace adhesives need heat to cure properly, usually 180-220 degrees. That's fine in a factory, but useless if you're trying to repair a wind turbine in Montana winter or fix a pipeline in Alaska. I was working with a modified epoxy resin system, trying different catalyst combinations. Around midnight, I accidentally knocked over a beaker of experimental solvent into a batch of titanium-enhanced polymer I'd been testing. Instead of ruining the mixture, it created something entirely new. A gel that stayed workable at 40 degrees, but formed molecular bonds stronger than traditional composites at room temperature. I spent the next 4 months refining the formula. The final version had tensile strength of 85,000 psi, compared to 45,000 psi for standard aerospace adhesives. Cure time at 40°F was just 45 minutes versus 6 to 8 hours for heat-cured systems. The cost per pound was actually 15% lower than existing solutions. Let me think about it, I said, pushing back from the conference table. Garrett's eyebrows went up. This isn't really a negotiation, Nathan. I stood up, grabbed my jacket. The room went dead quiet. You could hear the fluorescent lights humming overhead. Where are you going? He called after me. I stopped at the door and looked back at him. To think about whether I want to work for 38% of what I'm worth or find somewhere that appreciates what I bring to the table. That was the last lie I told him. I already knew exactly what I was going to do. I drove home to our house in Cedar Park, $425,000 mortgage that this salary cut would absolutely destroy. The monthly payment was $2,800. On $42,000 a year after taxes, I'd be bringing home maybe $20,600 a month. Not enough to cover the mortgage, let alone utilities, food, car payments, and Nathan Jr.'s college fund that we'd been building for his sophomore year at UT. Sarah was in her home office doing quarterly taxes for her clients when I walked in. She took one look at my face and set down her calculator. How bad? $42,000. She was quiet for a moment, running numbers in her head. Sarah's a CPA, so she immediately understood what this meant for our finances. That doesn't even cover the mortgage. I know. I pulled out my phone and called Michael Torres, the patent attorney I'd been working with. Michael, it's Nathan. We need to file everything today. Today, the full filing fees are going to be $45,000 for all 3 patents. I know. Do it. After I hung up, Sarah stared at me. What patents? That's when I told her everything. The garage lab, 3 years of secret research, the breakthrough that would revolutionize aerospace manufacturing. Sarah listened to everything without saying a word, her accountant brain processing the implications. You've been working on this for 3 years and didn't tell me? I wanted to be sure it worked first, and I needed to protect us. I could see what was coming at Titanium Dynamics 6 months ago when they started the budget freezes. She was quiet for a moment, looking at the patent filing receipts I'd kept in our home safe. How much are we talking about? Realistically? I pulled out the market analysis I'd done with Michael Torres. The aerospace coating market is $180 million annually. Automotive and defense add another $120 million. Conservative estimates show my technology could capture 15% market share within 2 years. That's $45 million in total sales. And your cut? Standard licensing deals are 8-12% royalties. I'm targeting 10%, so $4.5 million annually once we hit full market penetration. Sarah set down the papers. Nathan, that's life-changing money. Enough to pay off the house, fund both kids' college, and retire comfortably by 55. The next morning, I called in sick to Titanium Dynamics. Instead, I drove to Michael Torres's office in downtown Austin. His firm, Torres & Associates, specialized in intellectual property litigation for tech companies. The patents are solid, Michael said, reviewing the technical documentation I'd provided. Your garage lab documentation is meticulous. Purchase receipts for every piece of equipment, time-stamped video of major experiments, detailed lab notes with dates and signatures. What about Titanium trying to claim ownership? They'd need to prove you used company resources or developed the technology during work hours. From what I see here, you've got ironclad evidence that everything was done independently. Michael spread out 3 licensing term sheets he'd prepared. I've drafted preliminary agreements for non-exclusive licensing. The beauty of non-exclusive deals is you can license to multiple companies simultaneously. More competition drives higher royalties. What companies are you thinking? Apex Materials is the obvious first choice. They supply Boeing and Lockheed. Precision Aerospace handles Northrop Grumman contracts. Advanced Composites Group focuses on automotive applications. All 3 would pay premium rates for this technology. I studied the numbers. Apex Materials projected $25 million in annual sales using my coding system. At 10% royalties, that's $2.5 million per year from them alone. Precision Aerospace estimated $15 million annually, another $1.5 million. Advanced Composites was more conservative at $8 million sales, but that still meant $800,000 in royalties. Total projected annual income, $4.8 million. When can we start approaching them? Patent protection is officially active as of this morning. We can begin licensing negotiations immediately. That afternoon, I walked back into Titanium Dynamics with a manila envelope and a plan that had been 3 years in the making. Garrett had called a follow-up meeting to discuss my future with the company. Smaller conference room this time, just him, Ashley Sullivan, and some HR woman whose name I'd never bothered learning. "Nathan, thanks for coming in," Garrett said as I sat down. "Have you had time to consider our restructuring offer?" "I have. And I've got a counter-proposal." I placed the envelope on the table and spread out 3 patent certificates like I was dealing cards in Vegas. Patent US 10-234,567, titanium enhanced polymer coating system for sub-zero temperature applications. Patent US 10-234,568, catalytic curing agent for low temperature composite bonding. Patent US 10,234,569, application method for aerospace-grade adhesive systems. Licensing agreements for proprietary technology I developed independently. The cold cure coating system alone is projected to generate $45 million in annual market revenue. Garrett picked up the first patent certificate. His face went pale as he read the technical specifications and filing dates. "You can't do this. These had to be developed using company knowledge, company resources." "Actually, no." I smiled and pulled out a thick folder of documentation. Every single test was conducted in my personal laboratory using equipment I purchased myself. All development happened outside work hours. I've got video documentation going back 3 years, purchase receipts for $75,000 worth of equipment, and time-stamped lab notes proving independent development. Ashley grabbed the second patent. "This is the sub-zero bonding compound. We've been trying to develop this exact technology for 7 years. I know. I was on that team for 5 of those years. Using your equipment and your timeline, we achieved exactly 0 breakthroughs. Turns out the solution required a completely different approach, one that needed working outside your budget committees and approval processes." The HR woman looked confused. "Are you offering to license these patents to Titanium Dynamics?" "Exclusive licensing rights for all 3 patents, $150,000 per month per patent. That's $450,000 monthly, paid on the 1st of each month. Starting immediately." The silence lasted about 15 seconds. I could hear someone's phone buzzing in the hallway. That's $5.4 million a year, Garrett finally said. "Correct, and a bargain compared to what these technologies will generate in the marketplace. My market analysis shows total addressable market of $300 million annually. These patents will capture at least 15% of that within 2 years. Ashley was working her jaw like she was chewing invisible gum. "We can't authorize that kind of expenditure without board approval." "Then get board approval. I'll give you 48 hours to decide. We need to review the technical specifications first, verify the effectiveness of these formulations." "No," I said, gathering up the patents. "You need to agree to licensing terms first. Technical review happens after you sign the agreement, not before. If you want to run independent verification tests, you can purchase sample materials at market rates once the licensing deal is active." Garrett looked like I'd grown a second head. "Nathan, be reasonable. We can't write you a check for $450,000 based on patent certificates we haven't even tested." I stood up and tucked the envelope under my arm. "Then I guess we don't have a deal." "Wait," the HR woman said. "What about your position here? The salary adjustment we discussed?" I looked at her like she'd asked me to explain quantum physics to a goldfish. "My position here? As of right now, I'm giving my 2 weeks' notice. My last day will be Friday, March 15th. "You can't just quit," Ashley said. "You have ongoing projects, responsibilities to the team." "Actually, I can just quit. Texas is an at-will employment state, and as for my responsibilities, you just told me my work was worth $42,000 a year. I'm sure you can find someone at that salary level to handle whatever's left." I walked toward the door, then stopped and looked back. "Oh, and one more thing. I've already been contacted by Apex Materials. They're very interested in my background with advanced composite systems. That wasn't entirely true yet, but it would be by tomorrow morning." Garrett's face went red. "Apex is our biggest competitor. Your non-compete clause doesn't apply to independent licensing arrangements. I won't be their employee. I'll be licensing proprietary technology I own. Completely different legal framework." I left them sitting there looking like they'd been hit by a freight train. That afternoon, I made 3 phone calls that would change everything. First call, Robert Hayes, VP of Advanced Materials at Apex Materials. Mr. Hayes, this is Nathan Pierce. I'm a materials engineer with proprietary titanium polymer coating technology that might interest your Boeing contracts. What kind of technology? Sub-zero curing composite systems that maintain 85,000 psi tensile strength at 40 degrees. Patent protected as of yesterday. The line went quiet for 5 seconds. That's, Mr. Pierce, if that's accurate, you're describing the holy grail of aerospace manufacturing. Boeing has been trying to solve low-temperature curing for a decade. I can arrange a demonstration. Are you available tomorrow afternoon? He was. Second call, Patricia Walsh at Precision Aerospace. Same pitch, same shocked response. Lockheed Martin had a standing $50 million contract waiting for exactly this technology. Third call, Tom Rodriguez at Advanced Composites Group. They supplied Ford and GM's lightweight vehicle programs. Automotive applications could be worth $25 million annually. By 5 p.m., I had 3 demonstration meetings scheduled for the rest of the week. I spent that evening preparing sample kits in my garage lab, small test batches that would prove the technology worked without revealing the underlying formulations. Each sample went into labeled vials with basic performance specifications but no chemical composition data. Sarah watched me work, still processing everything that had happened. You really think they'll pay those kinds of licensing fees? They'll pay more than I'm asking. This technology solves problems that have cost the aerospace industry millions in delays and failed projects. Boeing alone spends $15 million annually on temperature-controlled curing facilities that my system makes obsolete. Wednesday afternoon, I drove to Apex Materials headquarters in Round Rock with a cooler full of samples and 3 years of confidence. Robert Hayes met me in their main conference room along with 2 engineers whose names I immediately forgot and their VP of Operations, Lisa Park. Before we start, I said, setting the cooler on the table, everything you're about to see is proprietary and patent protected. I'll need signed NDAs from everyone in the room. They signed without argument. The demonstration took 2 hours. I showed them how my cold cure adhesive maintained structural integrity at temperatures that turned conventional composites into useless putty, how tensile strength actually increased in sub-zero conditions, how cure time dropped from 6 hours to 45 minutes at 40 degrees. By the time I finished, Robert was leaning forward with his elbows on the table, staring at test samples that had just redefined what was possible in his industry. "This is revolutionary," he said. "How did you develop these formulations?" 3 years of independent research conducted entirely outside my previous employment, fully documented and legally protected. Previous employment? Titanium Dynamics, as of last week. Lisa looked up from the sample she'd been examining. Titanium has been trying to crack sub-zero bonding for years. You're telling me you solved it working alone? I'm telling you their approach was fundamentally flawed. They were trying to modify existing polymer chains instead of developing new catalytic systems. Sometimes you need to start from scratch instead of iterating on failure. Robert nodded. What are you looking for? Employment, partnership, licensing, non-exclusive licensing rights. You manufacture and distribute under my patents. I retain ownership and collect royalties on everything sold. What kind of royalties? 10% of gross revenue for the primary coating system, 8% for the catalyst technology, 6% for the application process. Robert didn't flinch. We'd need to verify these formulations at production scale, run our own testing protocols. I'd provide technical support during the scaling process. I'll be available for ongoing development and improvements. We talked for another hour about production timelines, market analysis, and competitive positioning. By the time I left, Robert had promised to present my proposal to Apex's executive committee within 48 hours. Thursday brought similar meetings with Precision Aerospace and Advanced Composites Group. Both companies were interested. Both wanted licensing deals. Both were willing to pay premium rates for technology that could give them decisive competitive advantages. But Thursday also brought a phone call I'd been expecting. Nathan, this is Michael Torres. Titanium Dynamics filed a lawsuit this morning. They're claiming ownership of your patents based on intellectual property clauses in your employment contract. I was in my garage lab running quality tests on production samples. Do they have a case? not based on your documentation, but they're alleging you used company resources and company time to develop the technology. They want an emergency injunction to stop you from licensing while the case is pending. How long does that usually take? Emergency hearings can happen within days. But Nathan, they filed this as a trade secret misappropriation claim. That's serious. If they can prove their allegations, you could face criminal charges. I set down the polymer sample I'd been testing. What do they need to prove? Evidence that you used titanium equipment, materials, or work time. Email records showing research on company systems. Witness testimony from colleagues who observed you working on related projects during business hours. They're not going to find any of that. How can you be certain? Because I've been planning for this possibility for 3 years. Every material purchase has a receipt with my personal credit card. Every piece of equipment in my lab has dated invoices. Every test was conducted after hours and weekends. I've got security camera footage from my neighborhood showing me working in the garage at all hours. What about your work at Titanium? Any overlap with your patents? Different projects entirely. At Titanium, I was working on heat-resistant compounds for high-temperature applications. My patents involve low-temperature curing systems. Completely different chemical principles, different applications, different market segments. Michael was quiet for a moment. They might try to argue that your work at Titanium gave you foundational knowledge essential to developing the patents. Let them try. General chemistry knowledge isn't proprietary. They'd have to prove I learned something specific at Titanium that was essential to developing the cold cure system. My lab notes show I solved the low-temperature problem using principles I learned in graduate school 15 years ago. The lawsuit was served that afternoon. Titanium Dynamics versus Nathan Pierce, alleging theft of trade secrets, breach of employment contract, and unfair competition. They wanted monetary damages, transfer of patent, ownership, and an emergency injunction preventing me from licensing the technology to anyone. I read through the 47-page complaint that evening, highlighting key allegations. Most of it was legal boilerplate, but several sections caught my attention. Plaintiff alleges that defendant utilized proprietary knowledge and trade secrets obtained during 7 years of employment to develop competing products in violation of confidentiality and intellectual property agreements. Defendant's patents incorporate foundational research conducted during work hours using company facilities and resources. Defendant's actions constitute willful misappropriation of trade secrets and tortious interference with prospective business relationships. It was all speculation and legal intimidation. They didn't have actual evidence because there wasn't any evidence to find. But the lawsuit served another purpose. It sent a signal to Apex, Precision, and Advanced Composites that my patents might not be legally secure. That was a problem I needed to solve quickly. Friday morning, I called an emergency meeting with all 3 licensing prospects. We met at a conference room I rented at a downtown Austin hotel. Robert Hayes represented Apex. Patricia Walsh handled Precision Aerospace. Advanced Composites sent Tom Rodriguez and their chief counsel. I'm sure you've all heard about the lawsuit, I said without preamble. I wanted to address this directly rather than let rumors derail our negotiations. Robert spoke first. Our legal team reviewed the complaint. Titanium's claims look like fishing expedition tactics. They are, I said, pulling out my laptop. Let me show you exactly why their case is going nowhere. The next hour was the most important presentation of my career. I walked them through every aspect of my patent development. Purchase receipts for the $75,000 in garage equipment, video timestamps showing after-hours work sessions, chemical analysis proving my compounds used completely different base materials than anything Titanium had researched. I showed them the fundamental differences between my cold cure technology and the heat-based systems Titanium had been trying to develop. Different catalysts, different polymer chains, different curing mechanisms. The only similarity was that both involved adhesives. My breakthrough came from applying organometallic chemistry principles I learned in graduate school, I explained. Titanium was stuck using traditional epoxy modification approaches. They never explored metallocene catalyst systems. By the time I finished, all 3 companies looked satisfied. Patricia actually smiled. This documentation is bulletproof. Our attorneys will have no problem defending these licensing agreements. Tom nodded. What's our timeline for production, assuming the legal issues resolve quickly? Scaling tests can begin immediately. Full production capacity within 90 days once you sign licensing agreements. All 3 companies signed preliminary agreements that afternoon. Non-exclusive licensing at the tiered royalty rates I'd proposed, with production beginning within 60 days. Conservative revenue projections: Apex, $2.5 million annually; Precision, $1.8 million; Advanced Composites, $1.2 million. Total projected income, $5.5 million per year. 2 weeks later, Michael called with news that made my entire month. Motion to dismiss granted. Judge threw out Titanium's complaint entirely, called it speculative allegations unsupported by credible evidence. What about our countersuit? That's moving forward beautifully. We're asking for legal fees, damages for interference with business relationships, and punitive damages for frivolous litigation. Conservative estimate, $1.8 million. That weekend, I got a call from James Morrison, who'd quit Titanium the previous week. "Nathan, you need to know what's happening over there. Complete meltdown." "How bad?" "They've got 4 teams working 16-hour shifts trying to reverse engineer your patents. Burning through materials budget like crazy. They're not even close to replicating your results." "What about other projects?" "Dead in the water. The heat-resistant compound project failed its 8th consecutive test last week. High-pressure sealant development got canceled entirely. They're hemorrhaging money on failed research while legal fees pile up." "How's morale?" James laughed grimly. 8 people quit in 2 weeks. Dr. Stevens from Polymer Development, Lisa Park from Quality Control, 3 lab technicians. Word is spreading that the company won't survive past Christmas. Financial trouble? Stock price dropped 35% since your lawsuit news broke. Quarterly projections missed by $12 million. Board called an emergency meeting last Thursday. 6 months later, the Austin Business Journal ran a front-page article, "Local Tech Company Files." Chapter 11 Bankruptcy. Titanium Dynamics had officially collapsed, unable to service $45 million in debt after losing their major aerospace contracts to competitors with superior technology. The article mentioned that key personnel had been hired by other companies and that patent assets were being auctioned to satisfy creditors. What it didn't mention was that I'd purchased several of those patent assets through a shell company, not anything related to my own technology, just manufacturing processes and testing protocols that might prove useful for future development. I also hired 6 former Titanium employees for my new company, Pierce Advanced Materials. James Morrison became my VP of Operations. Dr. Stevens joined as Senior Polymer Chemist. 4 lab technicians came aboard as testing specialists and quality control managers. PAM wasn't just a licensing operation. We provided full-service materials development, from initial research through prototype development to production scaling for aerospace and automotive clients. Our first major contract came from Boeing, developing next-generation versions of my cold cure coating system for the 787 Dreamliner program. Second contract, Lockheed Martin wanted specialized composites for F-35 applications. Third, Ford Motor Company needed lightweight bonding systems for their electric vehicle program. By the end of our second year, Pierce Advanced Materials employed 45 people, held 12 patents, and generated $18 million in annual revenue. My personal income from licensing royalties had reached $6.2 million annually. 3 years after that conference room confrontation, I was reviewing quarterly reports in my corner office when James knocked on my door. "Nathan, your 3 o'clock appointment is here." A young woman walked in, probably late 20s, nervous expression, carrying a folder of research notes. "Mr. Pierce, I'm Amanda Rodriguez. I'm a materials engineer at Davidson Chemical. I was hoping to discuss a situation with my employer." I gestured to the chair across from my desk. "What kind of situation?" "They're trying to claim ownership of patents for work I developed independently, threatening my job if I don't sign over the rights. I heard about what happened between you and Titanium Dynamics." I smiled and opened a fresh notebook. "Tell me everything from the beginning." 20 minutes later, I was on the phone with Michael Torres, explaining Amanda's situation and asking if he'd be interested in taking another intellectual property case. "Sounds familiar," Michael said. "What kind of patents are we talking about?" "Self-healing concrete compounds using embedded crystalline structures. Could revolutionize infrastructure maintenance." "And she developed this independently?" "Home lab, personal materials, documented everything. Her employer found out and wants to claim ownership based on employment contract provisions. Same playbook Titanium tried with you." "Exactly. but this time we know how to shut it down before it escalates. I looked across my desk at Amanda Rodriguez, who was reviewing her documentation with the focused intensity of someone whose career hung in the balance. Some stories end. Others just keep going, rippling outward in ways you never expected. Sometimes the best revenge isn't just protecting yourself, it's building something better and helping others do the same. 5 years after Garrett Sullivan cut my salary to $42,000, Pierce Advanced Materials was valued at $85 million. We employed 120 people across 3 facilities. Our patents were licensed by companies in 18 countries. And Garrett, last I heard, he was selling industrial packaging solutions in Dallas for $58,000 a year. Sometimes justice takes time, but it always comes around.